the Lord. Do you find it to be, please engage me in this conversation. Do you find that people are easily offended in our culture today? Okay. Because of how people speak to us or to others that we love and care about? I mean, I would say that we are very political at times in the church, in our community, and we can be easily offended by politics, by religion, by what other people do, by their words. We're so easily offended, I've noticed, in our culture. Someone cuts you off on the interstate, you're going to work, and it's easy to be offendable. It's easy to get offended by their actions or by four-letter words that they speak to you because you weren't driving fast enough, or I'll give you an example. I was in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I was driving to a Baptist seminary because they had a seminary there, and I always would check out books there at the Baptist seminary. And I was on the interstate going to the Baptist seminary, of all places, Baptist seminary. And I was driving, and I remember this guy slowed down. I don't know if this has happened to you, but he slowed down enough. He was in a truck. How can I remember? Because I got really offended and angry at him. So when you get easily offended and angry at someone, I feel like the color red starts in my mind. I can see the color red. I'm hot. I'm very ready to strike. And I was driving, and literally he slowed down so that I put my turn signal on. He slowed down. I think I was in the right lane going into the left lane or something, and he slowed down. And then put my turn signal on. I was going to get ready to get to the next lane, and guess what he did? He sped up. And I'm like, I don't even want to repeat what I said to him. And then he sped up, and then he drove right around me, and he laughed at me, of course, gave me a finger, laughed at me. And so I sped up, and we were like, toe-to-toe driving, and I was saying something, he was saying something. Talk about road rage. I was easily offended. Whatever that, that could happen to you on the road. It could happen to you at the supermarket, Kroger. It could happen to you with your kids, something they say. You're easily offended. At times, it doesn't take much to be offended by people's actions and words in our culture. We have like this hot button issues in our culture and in our families, and we hit those. We trigger those hot buttons. And we get mad, we get angry, we get offended. Anger comes with being offended, but so does compassion. At the same time, it is difficult to be unoffended in our culture. I mean, it's easy to be, I think, offended in our culture. It is difficult at times to be unoffended. Have you ever heard of being unoffended? No, because all you hear is being offended, because we have political correctness in our culture, which it has its pluses and minuses, strengths and limitations. For that would mean letting go of arguments, letting go of wanting to prove the other wrong and us right, and ultimately letting go of deeply righteous anger. To be unoffended, you'd have to let those things go. You'd have to let go of righteous anger, righteous indignation. You have to let go of arguing with other people and getting into wanting to be right and the other to be wrong. As we look at being unoffended Christians, we notice that they see things clearly and aren't shocked by our culture's lack of regard and respect for others. They don't see any surprises. I think the unoffendable Christian is those that are like, that guy who cut me off, that's not a shock. That was expected. People will do that in our culture. People at times will be sinful. They will at times break our hearts. At times they will backstab us. They will say unkind, unnecessary things to us. The unoffended heart is a compassionate heart that easily sees injustice and responds to it with love and compassion, not hate and revenge. It is the heart of Jesus. Let me make my point stronger, and this comes from Brent Hanson's own words. Quote, I used to think, write this down, I used to think that to be Christ-like meant to be alienated and put off by the sin of others. But it is quite the opposite. Refusing to be alienated and put off by the sin of others is what allows me to be Christ-like and unoffended. Let me say that again. I used to think that to be Christ-like meant to be alienated and put off by the sin of others, but it's quite the opposite. Refusing to be alienated and put off by the sin of others is what allows me to be Christ-like and unoffended. Jesus at times protected those who were marginalized or insulted groups in the Bible and even ate with them. He ate with the offendable, the offensive. He ate with those people. He dined with those people, the tax collectors, the prostitutes, those who were looked at and looked down upon, adulterous women, tax collectors, prostitutes. He loved these people and showed them kindness and gentleness. So in the Bible, there were people who were offended by that culture, and yes, Jesus cared for them. And I think that's interesting. Yet, this same Jesus who loved and protected the offended groups of the Bible was the same Jesus in the Bible who spoke of things and did things that seemed offensive to the reader of today. Correct? Let me point it out. He said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and anyone who comes through me will have eternal life. This, in our postmodern world, seems to be offensive to those in our culture who like tolerance and inclusion. Al Early writes that many of his disciples, not the 12, and many others left him because they didn't like the sum of Jesus' teachings. Judas betrayed Jesus. Peter denied Jesus. Jesus called the religious elite a brood of vipers and scorpions. Government leaders during Jesus' day were uncertain as to what to do with him. As we see with Pilate and Herod passing him back and forth, what do we do with this guy? He's offending us. To mention the name Jesus will either spoil a night out on the town, right? Or will spoil a good conversation. Have you ever been with your friends? I mean, talk about a conversation stopper, right? You get into politics, you get into religion, or you just mention the word Jesus. And guess what? That conversation, whoop, takes a nosedive. People are quiet. They're silent. It's awkward, right? I don't know if I want to talk about Jesus tonight. I was hoping to talk about the Cubbies or the Dodgers. To be offended isn't necessarily bad, for Jesus defended the offensive people in his day and the offended. Yet on the other hand, to be easily offended at the drop of a hat can spoil a good night on the town, can make some people feel silenced and censored, and can scare them enough that they believe they need to walk on eggshells around the offended. Being easily offended has the possibility of spiking your blood pressure, keeping you angry and up at night. How many of you have problems with sleeping because you're easily offended? You have problems with your blood pressure, with sleeping. You keep the score. You kind of nurse that wound and nurse that wrong for a few days. Being easily offended has a possibility of spiking blood pressure, keeping you angry and up at night. Jesus protected those who were offended, but also his comments and actions themselves were offensive in his day to the ruling elite. Today's lesson, we will explore the heart that is offended easily. For this type of heart is susceptible to holding on to anger and is easily offended and can at times have difficulty forgiving others. So how many of you, if I asked you right now, have a hard time of letting things go? Raise your hand. Thank you. How many of you just nurse that anger, nurse that wound over and over, and you can't let it go? On the other hand, we will look at a different type of heart, what I call the contented heart. So the first kind of heart I call the offended heart, or I would call the offended heart. The heart, and I call that, this is what I call it, write it down, the begrudging heart. What Brent, Hanson called the offendable or offended, I call the offended heart. And then there's the contented heart, and I call that the heart that lets go easily. Okay? And that's called the unoffendable heart, or the unoffended heart. This is the type of heart that is unoffendable. Brent Hanson describes the unoffendable Christian, which helped me in my sermon today. He shares a story in his book, Unoffendable. And I want to share this with you because I think it captures the unoffendable heart. This is what he says, quote, "Offense obscures our vision, Removing the fence enables us to see people in a wonderful new ways, to see them as they are. John is a class act, and he was talking about his friend John. He arrives at each game impeccably dressed, highly organized, and a briefcase in hand. That's how he rolls. He's polished, he's polite, he's clean, he's smooth, he's successful. He's also a professing Christian. See, next to John at each game is this polar opposite in the behavior department. Bill is a grizzled former player whose life has taken some twists and turns for the worse. He's boisterous and foul. His language is remarkably crude, pornographic even. He's very tough to take. And as I worked with Bill, filling in for John, I wondered, wow, how does John, who's even more take charge, blunt, straight-laced than I am, deal with this kind of guy? And it's night in, night out. I can't imagine how he handles this. When profane Bill found out I was friends with button-down John, he gave me my answer. I braced myself. I will leave the profanity out, but it went something like this. You're friends with John? Really? Oh, yeah. You know what? I got something to say about that guy. That guy, John, is... He paused. Then momentarily he continued. A couple of weeks ago, you know what he did? He brought in a plaque he had made for me. It was the magazine cover from back in the day, me and my teammates. He had an original cover put in the plaque, and he gave it to me to honor me. Bill was actually tearing up. You know what? He went on. That guy is really good to me. And he just treats everyone the same up here, all of us the same, the interns, me, the stadium manager, everybody. He just treats us all the same, like he loves us, like we're one big happy family. Several seconds passed before he finally concluded, I still can't believe he did that for me. John simply refused to be offended. He was free to love Bill just the way he was. Brent Hanson looked back at this experience and humbly admitted in his book that, quote, his instinct, and I'm sure the instincts of many in Bill's life, was to tell Bill to shut up or at least watch his mouth or get his act together. Or maybe I could ignore him, but John went and made him a plaque because he was unoffendable or because he was possessed with a contented, what I considered, quote, a contented heart that surrendered to Christ and let Christ overtake the walls of his heart. This is what I believe. So the unoffended heart, or what I call the contented heart, is the kind of heart that lets go of grudges and anger right away. Write that down. And doesn't hold on to past resentments and old wounds that keep us stuck and keep us nursing that old wound and then using at the right time, the right moment to spring it on people to hurt them. The heart that Paul has in mind in today's passage is a heart that lets go. Be angry, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. If you have an anger problem, the first thing Paul teaches us today is to forgive the very same day, to let that anger go the same day. Learn to let go and don't give your anger a chance to swell and grow bigger by holding on for a few days or even a week or even a year. I've talked to many couples that hold on to their anger for many years, essentially poisoning the clean well of their hearts. This is the type of heart that Jesus mentions in Matthew when he speaks of immediately letting go of anger and being reconciled with our brothers and sisters in Christ. And I love this because he says reconciliation with your brothers and sisters takes precedence over offering your gift at the altar of worship. He says, go and be reconciled first, and then come back and give your gift. That is what we're talking about today, letting go. And then coming off your gift. Come to terms quickly with your brother or sister before it is too late. That is the unoffendable or contented heart. Another element, as Paul describes the contented heart, is letting go of not only anger, but also filthy talk, or what Paul describes as evil talk, gossip and slander. A heart that lets go or is content gives encouragement and blessings to others. It's not easily offended because it's working on blessing and encouraging others and sharing the grace and love of Christ with others. And the unoffendable heart is a heart that says, God has this under control. I don't know the motives or the heart of the other who's offending me, so why be offended? The main thing is to say, God has this creation in his control in the palm of his hands, and all I can do is just respond with a loving and unoffendable heart. The unoffendable heart doesn't speak unkindly to others who offend them, and we don't return evil for evil, for we surrender our grievances and hate to God. Do a quick test for me. Are the words that you speak seasoned with grace and encouragement? If not, maybe you are not letting go of something bitter in your life that drastically affects your speech and maybe is offensive to you. We learn from the passage today that pure and positive words spring forth from a contented heart and a clean heart that is unoffended. The qualities of a contented heart, as Paul says, are kindness, forgiveness, and even beauty, I would say, a beautiful heart. When we let go, we give Jesus a chance to change us from the inside out and clean the cellars of our hearts, the basement of our hearts. So the first type of heart is what I describe as a contented heart, or as Brent Hanson describes, or he really doesn't describe this, but I'm borrowing this unoffended or unoffendable term and using and applying it to my sermon today, calling it the unoffended heart. The unoffended heart. So the second type of heart that Jesus needs to let go of, or that needs to get a hold of, is a heart that lets things go. I mean, that was the first kind of heart. This kind of heart that Jesus has in mind is the second kind of heart, which is a heart that holds on. I call it the begrudging heart, or what we would call the offended heart after reading Brent Hanson's book. This kind of heart will hold on to resentment for many days and weeks after the wound. This heart has been hurt over and over and has become hardened and calloused. It is hard to penetrate this heart, for it doesn't trust God, nor does it trust others. It is easily offended, and it offends others with its words and actions. It's kind of a heart that says revenge is important. We want to get even with people that have hurt us. So the first kind of heart, again, is an unoffended heart. This second heart is the offended heart, or what I call the begrudging heart. It is what Archibald Hunter describes in his commentary on Ephesians as what Paul describes in the letter as all the unlovely and unchristian qualities into one sentence. Bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander with all malice. This type of heart is what the pagans in Paul's day carried around in them. Hunter looks at the pagan heart in Paul's letter and writes, quote, "The life of Gentiles, which had once been theirs, is one of spiritual futility with vanity of vanities. Its marks are inward darkness and alienation from the true life God intended for them, founded as it is on ignorance and insensibility. So calloused in heart they become licentious in their greed to practice every kind of uncleanness. The begrudging heart is a heart that doesn't let go of old wounds, of old bitterness, of old broken relationships. It lives in the past and continues to wear the old, worn-out, torn clothes of the past that are not mended or sewn up by the grace and forgiveness of Christ. The word translated greedy literally means the desire to have more, and so expresses that ruthless self-assertion, Hunter observes, which tramples on the rights of others in order to satisfy its own impulses. This kind of heart is what Jesus said is the hardened soil that seeds fell on in his parable of the sower. And what I would call, out of that parable, I would call the offended heart, the bitter heart. Have you ever had your driveway torn up or the streets of Jeffersonville torn up? Have you noticed that? It's a mess. It's a mess. There's confusion. It's a mess. Which road do I go down? Which road am I on? Which road do I go down? You know that this kind of heart that I'm talking about, the offended heart, is a mess. It's torn up. It's not smooth. It's rough. It's unclean. It's dirty. And guess what? Jesus needs to come by and just smooth all these roads out. For he is our construction worker. He's the one who comes in, constructs, and restores our hearts that have been destroyed by our culture and by other people. It's easy to get offended, and it's easy to have an offended heart, a begrudging heart. So the first type of heart is the what? The unoffended heart that easily lets go of bitterness, right? Of unforgiveness, of malice, of gossip, of slander, of righteous indignation. And this second type of heart that I just mentioned, what is that called? Say it again. Yes, good. The offended heart or the begrudging heart. The last type of heart is the anxious heart, or what Tom Papez describes in his sermon as the crowded heart. This type of heart is a heart that doesn't have the peace of Christ in it. This type of heart can easily perceive an injustice and shut down because these people perceive others as easily offended, and therefore they walk on eggshells seeking approval and remain neutral in a divided world. They don't want to upset the apple cart. They don't want to make waves, so they just are silent. The crowded heart has tried to work for the approval of friends and church members and therefore doesn't have any contentment. It lacks focus and goes from one thing to another without any purpose or meaning. It is the divided heart which makes it susceptible to spiritual warfare and struggle, and the crowded heart drowns out the voice of God and his love and strives for the blessing and approval of the culture and of others. Some seed fell among the thorns and it choked out the tender plants. These represent others who hear God's word, but the message is crowded out by worries, wealth, and desire for other things, or the message isn't lived out, as I say. This heart has been uprooted from its rightful home by the worries and attraction of the world, severed from oneness with God, and this kind of heart feels orphaned and alone. This heart has a difficult time connecting with God and others. And so therefore, for these people who are anxious, they don't speak up. They don't assert their beliefs. So they're just neutral. It's a heart that feels alienated and isolated from itself, God, and others. It is a wandering heart, a restless heart that doesn't feel at home in this world. It constantly dances around offensive issues and doesn't want to engage. Do you have friends like that? They're neutral. They flip and flop, and they don't really say much. They're quiet. They're anxious. Their crowded heart doesn't have a lot of peace or certainty. So here's my last point, and then I'll get to the challenge. Jesus shows up on the cross. This is what I love. Jesus shows us on the cross what being unoffendable looks like in an offendable world of sin and brokenness. While he was on the cross between two offensive criminals, what we would deem offensive or offendable, I don't know how you'd say it, whom that culture despised, as he suffered a humiliating death, he looked out at those who were offensive and offended him, and he said, "Forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." Jesus had a heart that was unoffendable and content. May we have that same heart today. So, as I told you, there are two kinds of hearts, or I called three kinds of hearts: the offendable heart and the unoffendable heart. The last was the anxious and crowded heart. Here's my challenge. What benefit and or cost are you deriving from holding on to something, such as power and control or fear? And what benefit cost are you deriving from letting go of anger and an unforgiving heart? Application. This comes from Brent Hanson. This is my last point. I'm going to leave you with a Brent Hanson insight. And then I want to show you something. Insight that I found helpful as we leave here today. This is what he says. Yes, the world is broken, but don't be offended by it. Instead, thank God that he's intervened in it, and he's going to restore it. Yes, the world is broken, but don't be offended by it. Instead, thank God that he's intervened in it, and he's going to restore it. We are offended over the masks. We are offended or unoffended. I don't know where you are with the mask, but remember, thank God that he's intervened in this broken world, and he's going to restore it. Now, I want to leave you with one last point. Now, here's a bag, okay? An offendable heart is this. Think about it. When we keep score of every little insult and wound, guess what happens? The offendable heart is this. Look at this brick. See? Those bricks go up. Look at this. Look. This is the offended heart. Look at this. Look, I'm putting bricks in this. What happens as I put the bricks in? It gets heavier. Look at this. All of you who are visual learners here today, look. Take a look on Facebook. This is offendable heart. This is the heart that's easily offended. This is what you carry around. Oh, this is heavy. So watch. The unoffendable heart, the unoffended heart goes like this. I'm taking that, and I'm just letting it go. Taking those bricks, letting that go. Guess what? It gets lighter and lighter. Look at that. Look at that. Easy to carry. Right? Easy to carry. Remember that. Let us pray.